She was a bright and beautiful 18-year-old with big dreams.
She always wanted to work at NASA. She was very smart in school.
She was the joy and the light of the family.
But on a cold winter night, that light is suddenly extinguished.
She was lying on the bed, covered in blood.
Was it an intentional act or was it an accident?
Can you tell us what happened?
They don't understand who could have done this to her.
The police only have one suspect.
People were saying, this is a bad person.
Yeah, they were like yelling at each other.
For a detective, that's a huge red flag.
But does the suspect have a motive?
This is your fault. There's so many things that are unsaid and unseen in relationships.
I don't care anymore, whatever!
They didn't know anything about him.
Every time!
One day, it just explodes.
Can the investigators pick up the pieces and put together a case against her killer?
I legit was scared. He was acting insane.
Juries are extremely unpredictable.
A lot of people don't get justice at all.
Police! Freeze!
2022. It's early Sunday in Indianapolis, Indiana, the Hoosier State's capital and largest city.
Indianapolis is a great place for you to raise your family.
There's tons of things to do, so it attracts a lot of people.
But the vibrant city shuts down on a bitter winter night.
It gets cold down there for sure.
It's quiet, the streets are typically empty.
At around 1:30 that morning, the wintertime quiet is about to be broken by the wail of sirens.
911 dispatch got 2 phone calls back to back.
Hello? Where's the location of your emergency? I don't know. I don't know.
The caller abruptly hangs up. But soon another call comes in from the same phone.
911, where's the location of your emergency?
911 gets a second call, and this one is even more desperate. This is coming from a woman caller.
I need help. Where are you?
Then that call abruptly ends as well.
However, the dispatcher is able to pinpoint where the calls originated.
GPS data from the cell phone show that the call was made from an apartment complex on the southeast side of Indianapolis.
It's ringing from East Hannah Avenue. He was crying and screaming before he hung up. Okay. I'm gonna send it out.
Police quickly arrive at the apartment complex and begin searching for the 911 callers.
They didn't know exactly which apartment it was. They happened to notice that there was a door open.
They walk inside the door and they see blood in the living room area. They go further into the apartment and they find a woman.
Ma'am, are you okay?
She's lying on the bed, covered with a blanket.
When they pulled back the blanket that she was covered in, there was a gunshot wound to the arm and to her torso.
I've got a gunshot wound in the EMT.
Police and paramedics attempt to stabilize the young woman, but she's lost a lot of blood.
Can you tell us what happened?
I can't.
Who did this?
She really couldn't tell police too much. All she could say was her name, Daytara.
In some ways, 18-year-old Daytara Johnson was a typical teenager.
She always had a big smile on her face. She just enjoyed life.
She was very social. She always had a lot of friends.
She was just the life of the party. Wherever we was at, she would just bring the energy.
She was going to make her presence be known for sure.
Everyone loved her and everyone enjoyed her presence.
But Daytera was far from typical.
Most kids be outside in the summertime playing. She'd be in the house reading books.
School was a breeze for her. She was very intelligent.
She made straight A's all 12 years in school. She was very gifted.
Eventually, Daytera focused that intelligence on a specific goal.
She wanted to be a mathematician and a physicist.
She always wanted to work for NASA.
After graduating from high school in 2021, Daytera moved into her own apartment.
She really loved her freedom. She loved her privacy and really just wanted to start that journey on her own and begin college soon.
The gifted student also caught the attention of the opposite sex.
Growing up, she was more of a tomboy. Then as she got older, she loved her long nails and lashes.
Daytera's a very beautiful girl. The dudes gravitated towards her.
But she really wasn't interested in a serious relationship because she didn't want anything to interfere with her independence, her education, or her career goals.
But that changed when she met 20-year-old Anthony York.
She met him from her friends.
Daytera and Anthony actually met the spring of 2021, and he was immediately smitten.
The attraction was mutual.
He didn't really talk too much, but he was cool.
I'm glad you finally had the nerve to tell me how you feel.
You're so beautiful, it's intimidating.
I definitely saw them liking each other, for sure.
That attraction was there from the beginning. And from there, they just built a relationship and really kicked it off.
With everything going her way, Daytera felt like she was on top of the world.
I've got a gunshot wound. I need EMT.
But now, her future hangs in the balance as paramedics struggle to keep her alive.
She has 2 gunshot wounds to her body.
She was losing a lot of blood, and the paramedics could see that the situation was critical.
Can you tell us what happened?
The officers ask over and over.
Who did this?
But there's no answer.
They knew that they had to try to get her to the hospital as soon as possible. Daytera is pretty much going in and out of the door.
Then she lost consciousness.
She can't tell them anything else.
"18-year-old Daytera Johnson was enjoying the most exciting time of her life, becoming an adult with an apartment of her own.
Daytera was an independent young lady, able to get her first apartment at 18.
I was proud of her when she got her place.
She also had an exciting new relationship.
Friends had introduced her to 20-year-old Anthony York, and they had been dating ever since.
But now Daytera's life is hanging by a thread.
Daytera was found lying on the bed, bleeding from 2 gunshot wounds.
Daytera was still alive, but she was unconscious.
As Daytera is transported to the hospital, detectives arrive at the scene to begin their investigation.
One of the first things that the detectives noticed is that there was forced entry into the apartment. The door had been kicked in.
The apartment appears to be in a bit of a disarray, as if there was a struggle. It also appears to be blood in the living room.
And a clue to the weapon used by the shooter.
Yeah, we got a shell casing.
Because the shell casing and the blood were in the living room, the detectives determined that the shooting had taken place there.
What's not clear to detectives is how Daytera ended up in the bedroom.
They couldn't determine whether she had crawled into the bedroom or somebody had helped her because she was wrapped in a blanket.
In the bathroom, they find a bloody towel.
A bloody towel indicates that someone did try to stop the bleed.
But was it Daytera or the mysterious man who made the first 911 call?
They don't know who this male was that placed this 911 call. They don't know whether it was a boyfriend, whether it was a neighbor. They don't know who this individual is.
Was it the shooter? Was it someone who just heard the gunshots and came in?
If it was the shooter, why did he call 911? And if it wasn't the shooter, why did he flee the scene?
Did he run away in a panic? Did he run after the shooter? Did he have anything to do with this? They didn't know.
In addition to the evidence found at the scene, detectives also take note of what they don't find.
Detectives never found her keys. They never found her cell phone.
Could have been a robbery gone wrong. Yeah, he didn't mean to shoot her.
After going through the apartment, detectives talk to the manager of the complex.
They start asking that property manager, does she have a car? If she does have a car, where's it usually parked?
The property manager was able to confirm that she does have a vehicle.
She always parks in the same space.
Do you know where that is?
Right over there.
But the space is empty.
That car isn't here anymore.
The shooter probably took it. Do you have surveillance on the complex?
Yes, we do.
There are security cameras directly pointed in the direction of her apartment. So the property manager goes and gets all of that footage and then hands it over to police.
While the manager was retrieving the video and handing it over to police, detectives put out a be on the lookout alert for Daytera's car.
I need a bolo on Datora Johnson's vehicle.
Then they expand their search for clues to the area outside her apartment, including a nearby dumpster.
They couldn't see much in the dumpster, just some garbage bags, nothing out of the ordinary.
But then something catches their eye. A duffel bag.
They said it was on top of everything in the dumpster.
Clearly, this duffel bag had just been dumped.
So detectives investigate further.
Inside the duffel bag, detectives found some men's clothing.
They also find ammunition, and that ammunition looks similar to the spent casing they found in Daytera's apartment.
Detectives take the bag as evidence and begin to canvass the residents of the apartment complex.
So police start interviewing some neighbors, and they start to talk to two women who live near Daytera's apartment.
There were two young women that remember hearing Daytera and a male arguing.
Yeah, they were like yelling at each other.
When was that?
It was around 1:30.
Those two women say that they heard arguing right before two gunshots go off.
Do you know who she was arguing with?
We don't really know her like that. We weren't all up in her business or anything.
But they say the voice did sound familiar.
They've heard that same voice coming from that apartment before.
It sounded like the same man's voice that she would always get into arguments with.
It was probably her boyfriend.
Neighbors of 18-year-old Daytera Johnson have just told detectives that they heard loud voices coming from her apartment moments before Daytera was shot.
Those neighbors say that Daytera and a gentleman was arguing, and after that they heard two bangs.
And this isn't the first argument they've heard in her apartment.
Yeah, they were like yelling at each other.
One particular neighbor told the detective that she used to hear a bunch of arguing and fighting, but the police was never called.
Was that the same voice you heard tonight?
It sounded the same.
And that was her boyfriend?
I think so.
The neighbors didn't know the boyfriend's name, so the next move for detectives was to reach out to Daytera's family for more information.
But before they can conduct interviews with the family,
Homicide.
a call from the hospital changes the nature of the investigation.
Daytera is rushed to the hospital. She undergoes surgery. Doctors do everything they can possibly do to save her life. But it's too late. She doesn't survive.
Daytera's family is also contacted and break down at the news.
When I heard the news, I went into shock.
My husband just barely could speak, and he was like, "She gone."
When detectives arrive at her parents' home, they find a family struggling with their grief.
I was asleep. My twin brother, he had Brandon in my room. He was like, "She gone." I hear a lot of commotion in the front room.
My dad, he was in the living room, and police is in there. He was just crying nonstop.
But Daytera's parents are determined to see justice done.
Is it possible we could ask you a few questions to find out who did this?
Of course. Whatever we can do to help.
The first thing they tell detectives is that they can't imagine anyone wanting to hurt Daytera.
She's loved by everybody.
Is it possible that she might be involved in something that is dangerous?
Maybe something she didn't tell you about.
No, we were very close.
Detectives want to know, was Daytera involved in anything, gang activity, drugs?
Due to the forced entry, this possibly could be a drug deal gone bad or even some kind of gang retaliation.
But Daytera's family is adamant that she wasn't mixed up in anything like that.
Is anyone that she had problems with, disagreements with?
Her boyfriend, Anthony York.
They knew that they fought a lot, but she didn't seem scared. It was just more if she was annoyed when they fought.
She would just be like, "We argue, or we got in an argument." It's just like how you vent to your sister.
When they got in arguments, did it ever turn physical?
Honestly, we don't know.
Daytera didn't mention Anthony a lot.
The family had only encountered Anthony a handful of times.
It was kind of strange. We never knew who he was, what he was about.
I knew a lot of people surrounded by him. Like, I grew up with his mom and his dad. And I met him one time, but didn't personally know him.
And while the impression he made wasn't alarming, it wasn't reassuring either.
The first time we met him, the interaction was kind of weird. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't say that I'm Daytera's boyfriend.
He was just standoffish. He really wouldn't look at us too much.
Hoping to learn more, detectives return to the station and file requests for her social media and phone records.
Social media is such a huge aid in helping an investigation. These days, everybody posts everything on their social media.
While waiting for a response to the requests, detectives review the security camera video from Daytera's apartment complex.
They get an opportunity to look at the surveillance video, and that surveillance video tells a lot.
Yeah, that looks like her car.
Here we go.
They can tell that it's a young black man and he's carrying a duffel bag.
He goes and he dumps the duffel bag in the dumpster.
You see him go back inside the apartment, then come out and get inside the car and pull away.
That's gotta be the shooter.
That could be anybody.
With the darkness, the poor quality of the video, and the fact that the man had on heavy clothes because it was winter, it was almost impossible to identify him.
Could it be Anthony York? There may be an easy way to find out.
Detectives retrieved the duffel bag that had been collected as evidence from the dumpster.
They go through the duffel bag again.
And under closer examination, detectives find something.
The detectives found a bond warrant.
This is huge for the investigation. This is the break they needed.
There it is. Anthony York.
After finding a bail bond warrant bearing the name of Daytara Johnson's boyfriend, Anthony York, detectives are now convinced he's the person responsible for her death.
Here we go.
Video from a security camera showed only one person entering and leaving Daytara's apartment, and only Anthony would have a motive to dispose of a duffel bag full of his clothes.
But is Anthony York capable of murder?
Daytara's family didn't know much about him, so detectives started digging into his background.
And what they find is alarming.
Auto theft, resisting arrest, and criminal recklessness. And not one, but 2 outstanding warrants.
This is a guy that is basically running from the law.
Armed with these outstanding warrants, detectives rush to the address on file for Anthony York.
A man answers the door. He identifies himself as Anthony's brother, Dominic.
He tells the detectives that Anthony isn't there.
Do you know where I can find him?
I don't know. I don't keep track of him.
Dominic states that he didn't have any idea of where he was or when he would return.
Do you know what this is about?
I heard about that girl that got killed. I know he'd been dating her.
Do you know where Anthony was last night?
Nah, man. I don't know anything about it.
Detectives asked Dominic to get in touch with them if he heard from Anthony, but they didn't really have any confidence that he would.
When they return to the station, the detectives start reviewing the social media accounts they've been given access to. But Daytara's online presence is more complex than anticipated.
Daytara had a social media account that basically anyone could see, but she also had a separate account that was only for her close friends. On that account, she would post things about problems in her relationship, like fighting and Anthony's jealousy.
It was kind of like little petty stuff that would turn bigger because of the person he was.
She started coming out and saying they had a toxic relationship. Like they'd be arguing and fighting a lot.
She specifically talked about how she had been on and off in her relationship with Anthony York.
Hey, come over here.
And as detectives dig deeper, they find things that are very disturbing.
Daytara had actually sent this audio clip to a friend stating that Anthony had threatened her with a gun.
I told him to leave because we just couldn't stop fighting and I needed a minute. And that's like when he pulled out a gun and said that he wasn't going anywhere. It was crazy. He calmed down after that, but I legit was like scared for a second. He was acting insane.
And that isn't even the most alarming thing detectives find.
Look at the dates on the posts.
That's weird.
Someone after the shooting had been posting on her social media.
One post said, "I'm in heaven now," and another one promoting a fundraiser to raise money for funeral costs.
Daytara's family is shocked when detectives check to see if they've been posting on Daytara's accounts.
They didn't know anything about this.
Concluding that Anthony is likely behind the posts, detectives' next move is to review the data submitted by Daytara's cell phone provider.
The detectives could see that there were 2 calls made to 911, but there were also phone calls made to another number before those 2 calls were made to 911.
The number belongs to Anthony York's mother.
Within an 8-minute time period, someone had called Anthony's mother several times.
None of the calls were answered.
Detectives wondered if Anthony had panicked after shooting Daytera and then tried to call his mother before he fled the scene.
Before they can put a trace on the phone, detectives get word that Daytera's car has been found.
I was actively on social media posting her car because I'm like, whoever killed her has her car.
Soon afterwards, someone contacted Daytera's mother, and sure enough, detectives go and they find Daytera's car parked about 5 miles away from her apartment.
Check this out.
When detectives search the car, they find a driver's license. But it's not Daytera's.
The name on the driver's license was Dominic York. Somehow, the driver's license of Anthony's brother had ended up in Daytera's car.
Now the detectives don't know who committed this crime.
Did Anthony call his brother for help when he couldn't reach his mother?
Oh, call him. Get him down to the station.
Well, that's not gonna happen.
Dominic is already in custody.
They find out that he's actually in jail for unrelated charges.
But for the detectives, it's an opportunity.
Can you believe it?
They say, you know what? Why don't we start to just listen to some of his phone calls that he's making from the jail?
It doesn't take long for the strategy to pay off.
One call in particular was interesting.
Dominic called a woman named Felicia Hurley.
Detectives run a background check on this Felicia Hurley and learn that she actually resides in Phoenix, Arizona.
So why is Dominic calling her?
That's weird.
What do you mean?
In the phone call, Dominic is giving Felicia some advice.
It was obvious that he knew that their conversation was not private.
He was talking in code.
Tell him to lay low. It's hot.
Detectives realized he was sending a message to Anthony.
After listening to jailhouse phone calls between Dominic York and a woman named Felicia Hurley, detectives in Indianapolis believe they have a lead on Dominic's brother, Anthony, the main suspect in the murder of 18-year-old Daytera Johnson.
We thought he was still in the city, that people were just hiding him out. I had no idea he made it all the way to Phoenix.
Detectives then contacted law enforcement in Phoenix, Arizona for them to work together and see if they could locate Anthony.
3 weeks after the murder, investigators fly from Indianapolis to Phoenix.
They have to find Anthony and they have to find Felicia. So they get to Phoenix and they actually pull Felicia over during a traffic stop. So now they have her in custody and they can start asking some questions.
You know Anthony York?
I do, yeah.
She's friends with Anthony through Dominic, and Anthony had actually been staying with her.
But she insists she initially didn't know he was on the run from the law.
She's alleging that she didn't know anything about any outstanding crime, any warrants.
She says that Anthony came to Phoenix to get out of Indianapolis because a big winter storm was coming.
Did he ever tell you why he was really here?
No, but I got a little curious after talking with Dominic, and he told me to tell Anthony to lay low.
So, Felicia went to a court records website.
She found that he had 2 outstanding warrants.
But that's not all.
It's when she saw social media that she knew, wait a minute, this guy's on the run for murder.
What did you do when you found out?
I didn't do anything.
She was too afraid to say anything to Anthony.
She didn't want Anthony to do anything to her.
Did he threaten you?
No, he didn't have to.
Felicia says she just doesn't feel safe with Anthony around.
Let's go.
The detectives pass the information on to local law enforcement, who immediately head to Felicia's apartment.
Police! Freeze!
And on the patio, there's Anthony York.
Hands up. Turn around. Put your hands on the back of your head.
He is arrested without incident.
On February 10th, the investigators sit down with Anthony in a Phoenix interview room.
You know why you were picked up?
I got a couple of old warrants.
And a new one for murder.
Anthony says he's not surprised.
Anthony admits that he was in Daytera's apartment the night of the shooting, but he says he has nothing to do with it.
You want to tell us what happened?
I'm gonna tell you, but man, I still can't even believe it myself.
According to Anthony, it was a bad night from the start.
Anthony said that he and Daytera were broken up, that they had decided to go their separate ways.
What was the problem?
A lot of things, man.
Anthony says they'd been arguing a lot.
He was pretty convinced that she was seeing another man.
He did not know who that other person was.
Why'd you go over there if you got broken up?
I went over to get my stuff.
He was only there to retrieve some of his items from that apartment.
He did admit to the fact that they had had an argument.
This is your fault, not mine. You're the one always messing around.
I don't care anymore, whatever.
Anthony says he just wanted to get his things.
He stepped outside to go and throw something in the dumpster, some things that he had in her apartment that he no longer needed.
That's when it happened, man.
What happened?
He stated that when he went to the dumpster that someone went into her apartment.
He said he didn't know who it was.
He says an unknown man walked into Daytera's apartment and shot her.
Anthony York has just told Indianapolis detectives that his girlfriend, 18-year-old Daytera Johnson, was killed by a mysterious man who slipped into her apartment.
It was a crazy night.
Anthony told police that him and Daytera were breaking up and that he had gone over to her apartment to get some things that he had left there.
He admits they argued while he was there, but says it wasn't anything serious.
Anthony tells police this was just a breakup. It wasn't the biggest deal, but he went to go grab some of his clothes and put it in his duffel bag.
I decided I didn't need them, so I just threw them in the dumpster.
You threw away a duffel bag?
Yeah, I ain't need it.
He says that while he was out by the dumpster, he heard 2 gunshots.
He says that he heard the shots, turned around, and saw a man running out of Daytera's apartment.
Did you recognize him?
No.
What did he look like?
I don't know.
He says, I don't know, he was wearing a mask.
Alarmed, Anthony rushed back into the apartment.
What happened? What happened?
He went back into that apartment and seen that his girlfriend was shot.
He says he called 911, but he didn't know Daytera's address. So he was trying to figure it out so he can tell dispatch. And that's when Daytera got the phone and asked for help.
But detectives know that 911 wasn't the only number he'd called using her phone.
Phone calls were made to Anthony's mom.
Why did you call your mother before you called 911?
Man, I didn't know what to do.
He said he called his mom because he was in a panic and he didn't know what else to do. And so he called 911 and then he took off.
Why did you leave?
Because I knew y'all would sit here and try to pin this on me.
Why did you take her phone?
Daytera's phone.
I just picked it up. I don't know. It was a crazy situation.
He said when he realized he had her phone, he threw the phone out of the window. He said he didn't know where.
The detectives have heard enough.
At At that point, they let him know that they have video surveillance and there is no one else that could have been there.
You want to explain that?
I'm done. Give me a lawyer.
Cuff him. Let's get him out of here.
Get up.
They booked him on murder charges and they extradited him back to Indiana.
After his charge, it made me feel more at peace of the situation. He got what came to him.
With Anthony in custody, police and prosecutors assemble the case that they'll take to trial.
There's a lot of circumstantial evidence in this case.
And the evidence proved that Anthony was lying about what happened.
Nobody was on the videotape in the apartments besides him, so that story was bogus.
For trial, the DA's office put together their own story, one they believed they could prove was true.
Datera was a young woman. She's living on her own for the first time. She doesn't really know how to get out of this relationship with this guy.
On January 16th, the tension in the relationship boiled over.
The prosecutors suspect that Anthony got upset over something. Datera had posted on her social media accusing him of cheating.
You don't put my name out there.
If you're afraid of getting called out, don't do what you did.
Prosecutors believe that Datera and Anthony got into this big blowout argument.
At some point, Datera locked Anthony out of the apartment.
Get out. Let me in. Open the door.
But a locked door couldn't stop Anthony.
Anthony forced his way back inside the apartment.
You don't shut me out.
Stay away from me. Anthony.
Whether he meant to shoot her or not, they still don't know. And they actually do believe that at first he tried to help her.
You're okay, you're okay?
There was some panic in him.
Anthony called his mother first because he really did not want to call 911.
But when he couldn't get his mother, he made the call.
He did call 911, and he hung up with them quickly.
Then he started getting rid of evidence that he'd been there.
He decided to grab that duffel bag, dispose of any evidence that may have shown that he was in that apartment.
While he was doing that, Datera managed to pick up her phone.
Datera was able to make that phone call to 911, and then he came back. He took that phone, he got her keys, and he fled the scene.
Looking ahead to the trial, the prosecutor is confident, and Anthony York isn't.
Anthony knew that if this case went to trial, chances are that he would be convicted of murder. So he takes a plea deal, and he pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
Prosecutors know that it's better to offer a plea deal and know that the person is going to receive some time than take your chances with a jury.
Anthony is sentenced to 30 years in prison with an option for his sentence to be modified after he served 17 years.
To Datera's friends, the sentence isn't nearly enough.
It makes my skin crawl, honestly. You took someone's life, someone who you were supposed to love.
And it means Datera's family will never know the full truth.
We didn't get any explanation on what happened because he signed a plea deal. So we didn't go to trial and he didn't explain.
And they will never forget what they lost on that cold winter night.
Datera, I'm still thinking about you every day.
She had a beautiful soul. She loved everybody. She was beautiful, a beautiful person.
She was definitely a sweetheart, but she was a big sister at heart. She never let nobody play with us. I always respect that.
I miss my daughter. I wish that these young people would go seek help. Don't put your family in a situation that we're in, because we'll never be the same.
There is a profound and unsettling dissonance when an act of profound human violence is hidden within a landscape of unimaginable natural beauty. When we think of the Hawaiian Islands, the collective imagination instinctively conjures images of pristine white shores, gentle trade winds, and an atmosphere of ultimate leisure and escape. However, the Big Island of Hawaii is an entirely different entity. It is a landmass defined by its raw, volatile, and ancient geological power. It is an island that is still literally being born, shaped by active volcanoes, expansive lava fields, and rugged, unforgiving coastlines that face the vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Here, nature does not merely exist as a backdrop for vacationers, it dominates. It is an environment that demands respect and, at times, instills a deep sense of isolation. Nowhere is this stark, breathtaking isolation more palpable than on the northern Hamakua coast, and specifically within the towering, verdant walls of Waipio Valley. Historically known as the Valley of the Kings, Waipio Valley is a place steeped in cultural reverence and immense geographical majesty. It is not a place one simply stumbles upon. To reach the valley floor, one must navigate an incredibly steep, treacherous, winding road that drops thousands of feet down the side of a massive cliff. The valley is boxed in by these sheer, emerald green cliffs, some rising more than 2,000 feet into the clouds, effectively creating a natural fortress. Dense, untamed rainforests blanket the interior, fed by cascading waterfalls that carve their way through the ancient stone. At the mouth of this valley, where the freshwater rivers meet the violent saltwater of the ocean, lies a long, expansive beach composed entirely of black sand. This sand, born from the pulverization of volcanic basalt over millennia, is heavy, dark, and absorbs the heat of the tropical sun. It is a dramatic, moody shoreline, completely devoid of the commercialized polish found in the resort towns on the western side of the island. It is wild, it is remote, and it is perfectly capable of keeping a secret. The remoteness of Waipio Valley means that those who venture down to its black sands are usually seeking a specific kind of solitude. It attracts hikers, locals deeply connected to the land, and those who wish to disconnect entirely from the modern world. The rhythmic, thunderous crashing of the ocean waves against the dark shoreline creates a constant, deafening roar that drowns out all other sounds. The sheer scale of the cliffs makes any human figure on the beach look impossibly small. It is an environment where the forces of nature are so overwhelming that human endeavors and human tragedies can easily be swallowed whole. The elements here, the relentless salt spray, the heavy tropical rains, the shifting tides, and the scavenging wildlife, work quickly to reclaim anything left behind. It is an environment designed to erase, breaking down organic matter and washing away the physical traces of whatever transpired on the sand. June 1, 1999, began as an ordinary day on the Hamakua coast. The summer weather patterns typically bring a mix of intense, piercing sunlight and sudden, heavy downpours, a cycle that constantly shifts the top layers of the valley's terrain. On this particular afternoon, a group of beachgoers had made the arduous journey down the steep access road to enjoy the rugged beauty of the black sand beach. They were enveloped by the massive scale of the valley, the misty spray of the nearby waterfalls, and the relentless rhythm of the Pacific tide. They walked along the shoreline, tracing the boundary where the dark volcanic sand met the white foam of the crashing waves. In a place as vast and uniformly dark as this beach, any disruption in the natural pattern of the landscape immediately draws the human eye. The wind and the tides usually comb the sand into smooth, predictable ripples, creating an undisturbed canvas of volcanic glass and basalt. At exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, the tranquility of their excursion was permanently shattered. As the group traversed a specific section of the beach, near the edge where the ocean's reach begins to wane, they noticed an anomaly. The sand here did not lay flat. It was disturbed, heaped, and uneven, breaking the natural topography of the shoreline in a way that immediately suggested human intervention. It did not look like the aftermath of a changing tide or the digging of local wildlife. It looked deliberate. It looked like the earth had been hastily opened and haphazardly closed. Curiosity in such isolated places is often accompanied by a primal, lingering sense of dread. When the natural world presents something that feels inherently wrong, the human mind attempts to rationalize it before accepting the worst. Perhaps it was a buried pile of debris washed ashore by a storm, or a discarded campsite left behind by transient travelers. But as the beachgoers drew closer to the disturbed patch of dark earth, the reality of the situation became undeniably, horrifyingly clear. The shape beneath the surface, the specific contours of the mound, and the immediate visual evidence protruding from the heavy black sand left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. They had not found discarded debris. They had found a makeshift grave. Buried just beneath the surface of the volcanic sand was a human body. The psychological shift in that precise moment is difficult to fully articulate. At 2:46 in the afternoon, the beachgoers were experiencing the serene, awe-inspiring majesty of one of Hawaii's most sacred valleys. A minute later, at 2:47, they were thrust into the center of a gruesome, violent reality. The sheer panic and revulsion of uncovering human remains in a place of leisure triggers an immediate, desperate need for authority and intervention. The isolation of Waipio Valley, which moments before had felt like a peaceful retreat, suddenly transformed into a suffocating trap. The towering 2,000-foot cliffs that boxed them in no longer felt majestic. They felt like the walls of a massive, inescapable crime scene. The deafening sound of the ocean waves suddenly felt oppressive, masking whatever desperate sounds might have occurred on this very spot in the days or weeks prior. The beachgoers immediately retreated from the disturbed sand and contacted the authorities, initiating a chain of events that would permanently alter the history of the valley. When the Hawaii Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division eventually navigated the treacherous descent to the valley floor and arrived at the coordinates, they were met with a grim and incredibly challenging scene. Law enforcement quickly cordoned off the section of the black sand beach, establishing a perimeter in an environment that actively resists containment. Securing a crime scene on a tidal beach is a race against time and nature. Every gust of wind, every shift in the tide, and every drop of rain threatens to destroy the microscopic fragments of evidence that might explain how a human life came to a violent end in the sand. As the forensic exhumation began, the true severity of the situation emerged from the earth. The remains pulled from the black sand were in a state of advanced decomposition. The heavy, wet nature of the coastal environment, combined with the intense tropical heat, had accelerated the decay of the physical form. The body had clearly been resting in its shallow grave for a significant amount of time before the beachgoers happened upon it. The face was completely unrecognizable, stripped of its defining features by the harsh elements and the inevitable biological processes of death. The person pulled from the sand had been reduced to a grim anatomical puzzle, their identity entirely erased by the earth that had temporarily held them. This was not a drowning victim washed ashore by a turbulent ocean. This was a deliberate concealment. Someone had brought a body to this isolated stretch of the Hamakua coast, or they had ended a life right there on the shoreline, and they had used the environment to hide their profound transgression. They had relied on the isolation of the Valley of the Kings to keep their secret buried forever. They had almost succeeded. If the beachgoers had chosen a different path that afternoon, or if the shifting winds had smoothed the disturbed sand just a fraction more, the body might have remained lost to the elements indefinitely. Behind the anonymity of the decomposed flesh, behind the bureaucratic procedures of the arriving medical examiners, and behind the yellow police tape fluttering in the ocean breeze, was a human being with a name, a history, and a family. The destroyed remains belonged to a 22-year-old young man named Matthew Joel Peak. He was a resident of this very valley, a young man who had walked these same sands and navigated these same steep roads. His life had been violently interrupted, his future abruptly stolen, and his body discarded like refuse in the shadow of the towering cliffs. The discovery on June 1st, 1999, was not the end of Matthew's story, but rather the terrifying and bewildering beginning of a mystery that would stretch across decades. It marked the opening of a file that would become infamous within the Hawaii Police Department, a document of tragedy and frustration officially designated as Case F-96184. It is a case that embodies the darkest fears associated with remote, transient communities, the fear of vanishing without a trace, and the fear that a killer can walk away into the dense tropical foliage, leaving nothing behind but a shadow in the sand. More than a quarter of a century has passed since the afternoon the Earth was disturbed at Waipio Valley. Entire generations have grown up on the Big Island since the yellow crime scene tape was removed. The tides have washed over that specific patch of shoreline tens of thousands of times, smoothing the black sand into a perfect, uniform sheet of volcanic glass, erasing all physical memory of the violence that occurred there. Yet, the profound injustice of what happened to Matthew Joel Peak remains an open, unhealed wound. This is the anatomy of a cold case in paradise. This is an exploration of how a young man known to the community could be brutally erased from existence, and how, despite the passage of 25 years, the pursuit of the truth behind Case F-96184 continues to echo through the impenetrable, silent walls of the Valley of the Kings. To understand the profound tragedy of a life violently extinguished, one must first construct a portrait of how that life was lived. When the forensic experts painstakingly lifted a viable fingerprint from the severely decomposed remains discovered beneath the black sand, the anonymous victim was finally given back his name.
He was Matthew Joel Peak.
He was just 22 years old. In the span of a normal human lifespan, 22 is a mere prologue, an age characterized by transition, physical vitality, and the slow, often complicated process of finding one's permanent place in the world. For Matthew, that place, at least temporarily, was the deeply isolated and fiercely independent enclave of Waipio Valley. Residing in the Valley of the Kings is a deliberate choice that speaks volumes about an individual's character and their relationship with the natural world. This is not a landscape of manicured lawns, suburban conveniences, or paved driveways. The valley floor is a rugged, off-grid environment accessible only to those willing to traverse one of the steepest roads in the United States, a terrifying descent that requires specialized four-wheel drive vehicles and a steady nerve. To live in Waipio is to submit to the rhythms of the environment, to exist alongside the constant threat of flash floods, the deep mud of the rainforest, and a level of physical isolation that most modern citizens would find entirely unbearable. Yet, for a certain demographic of young, resilient individuals, this isolation is precisely the draw. It is a place of profound, almost prehistoric beauty, offering a lifestyle stripped of modern superficiality. By choosing to lay his head in the deep emerald embrace of this valley, Matthew positioned himself far removed from the conventional trappings of late 20th century society. He existed on the literal and metaphorical fringes of the Big Island, deeply embedded in a landscape that demanded physical endurance and a quiet comfort with profound solitude. However, the isolation of Waipio Valley creates an inevitable paradox for its residents. While the valley provides sanctuary and removal from the chaotic pace of modern life, the basic necessities of human existence, groceries, supplies, social interaction, and employment, demand connection with the outside world. The island of Hawaii is geographically massive, larger than all the other Hawaiian islands combined, characterized by vast, sprawling distances between population centers. For a 22-year-old living at the bottom of a 2,000-foot cliff, navigating these immense distances presents a significant logistical challenge. The official records from the Hawaii Police Department indicate a defining characteristic of Matthew Peak's daily existence. He was a frequent hitchhiker. In the context of the mainland United States in 1999, hitchhiking had already acquired a heavy stigma, often associated with extreme risk, transience, and societal danger. However, the cultural landscape of the Big Island during this era offered a remarkably different perspective on this practice. In the rural, geographically dispersed communities of Hawaii, catching a ride with a passing stranger was not necessarily viewed as an act of desperation or a dangerous gamble. Instead, it was a highly normalized, widely accepted, and completely functional mode of transportation. It functioned as an informal public transit system deeply rooted in the local ethos of communal support and mutual reliance. Young people, agricultural workers, surfers, and off-grid residents frequently relied on the kindness of passing motorists to traverse the long, winding stretches of the Hawaii Belt Road. Standing on the shoulder of a two-lane highway with an outstretched thumb was a common sight, an unspoken social contract where a driver with empty seats provided safe passage to a neighbor heading in the same direction. For Matthew, this was not merely a way to get from point A to point B. It was a fundamental aspect of his lifestyle, a daily routine that intricately wove him into the social fabric of the island's winding coastal highways. The investigators tracing Matthew's movements documented that his hitchhiking journeys were not random, aimless wanderings across the island. He had established clear, habitual routes, frequently traveling out of the northern Hamakua district and heading south toward two very specific, distinct regions, Hilo and Puna. The journey from the rim of Waipio Valley down the eastern coast toward Hilo is a long, serpentine route characterized by old sugarcane plantation towns, crumbling one-lane bridges, and the constant, misty rain that defines the windward side of the island. Hilo serves as the county seat and the primary commercial hub of the eastern coast. It is a historic, weathered, and deeply local city where the rural population converges to access heavy hardware, major supermarkets, medical facilities, and the centralized bus terminal. It is the inescapable center of gravity for anyone living on the eastern half of the island. Beyond Hilo, further to the south and east, lies the Puna district, an area that contrasts sharply with the lush, ancient greenery of Waipio. Puna is a vast, geologically volatile expanse defined by active volcanic rift zones, dense jungle subdivisions, and sprawling fields of sharp, black lava rock. In 1999, Puna was renowned as a haven for alternative lifestyles, attracting a highly diverse, sometimes transient population of artists, off-grid homesteaders, and individuals seeking a life completely removed from mainland norms. The fact that Matthew frequently traveled between the ancient, sacred isolation of Waipio, the bustling, rain-soaked commercial center of Hilo, and the rugged, alternative subdivisions of Puna paints a picture of a young man in constant, sweeping motion. He was navigating through deeply contrasting microcultures, covering dozens of miles of open road, and relying entirely on the unpredictable rhythm of passing traffic to facilitate his deeply nomadic existence. This constant movement across the vast expanse of the eastern Big Island produced a unique sociological effect for the 22-year-old. Despite lacking a permanent, stationary footprint in a traditional neighborhood, Matthew Joel Peak was not an invisible transient. The police investigation revealed a crucial detail regarding his social standing. He was well known by many people within the local community. In a rural environment where the population is relatively small and spread out over massive geographical areas, the people who consistently travel the connecting arteries become recognizable fixtures of the landscape. A young man regularly standing on the gravel shoulders of the highway, transitioning between Waipio, Hilo, and Puna, eventually becomes a familiar silhouette to the daily commuters, the truck drivers, and the local residents running their routine errands. He was a recognized participant in the informal hitchhiking economy of the island. People knew his face, they knew his general routes, and they likely knew the quiet, unassuming presence he brought to the passenger seat of their vehicles. This familiarity is a double-edged sword that lies at the very heart of this tragedy. On one hand, being a recognized face in the community offers a degree of safety. Drivers are more likely to pull over for someone they have safely transported before, fostering a sense of localized trust. On the other hand, this constant exposure on the open highway placed him in a state of perpetual, profound vulnerability. Every time he stepped up to the edge of the asphalt and extended his thumb, he was surrendering his personal safety to the absolute unknown. He was entering the enclosed, private space of a passing vehicle, completely isolated from the outside world, rolling down stretches of highway bordered by impenetrable jungle and steep ocean cliffs. Matthew's lifestyle required a fundamental, unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of his community. To hitchhike daily is to operate under the assumption that the person behind the wheel of an approaching vehicle is simply a neighbor offering a favor, a fellow islander upholding the unspoken code of the road. It is a lifestyle built on trust, openness, and a lack of fear regarding the strangers who populate the highway. Tragically, it is exactly this openness that malicious actors prey upon. The horrifying reality of Case F. 96184 is that on one of these journeys, on an unknown day, along an unknown stretch of road, that vital trust was violently betrayed. The young man who was a familiar, benign presence to so many local commuters eventually crossed paths with an individual, or perhaps a group of individuals, who saw his vulnerability not as an opportunity for kindness, but as an opportunity for absolute destruction. The very attributes that defined his life, his youth, his lack of a localized anchor, his reliance on the roads, and his trusting integration into the hitchhiking culture of the Big Island, ultimately became the exact mechanisms that facilitated his murder. He was a young man deeply connected to the sprawling landscape of Hawaii, constantly moving through its rain-swept highways and volcanic districts, only to have his journey permanently and brutally halted, his life extinguished, and his body violently returned to the earth in the very valley he called home. The portrait of Matthew Joel Peak is not one of a reckless drifter, but of a recognized, integrated 22-year-old whose daily reliance on his community was met with the ultimate, unthinkable act of betrayal, transforming a familiar face on the side of the road into the center of the Big Island's most haunting, unsolved mystery. When the panicked emergency call reached the dispatchers on the afternoon of June 1, 1999, it initiated a procedural response immediately hindered by extreme geography. The dispatch of the Hawaii Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division to the floor of Waipio Valley is not a standard law enforcement response. The valley is a geographical fortress, accessible only by a single, terrifyingly steep road carved into the side of a towering 2,000-foot cliff. Negotiating this descent requires specialized four-wheel drive vehicles and an agonizingly slow pace. For detectives dispatched from relatively flat precincts, the journey into the valley was a tense, time-consuming logistical hurdle. Every minute spent navigating the hairpin turns of the cliff face was a minute the crime scene lay exposed to the relentless elements of the Pacific coast. The environment of the valley floor is aggressively dynamic. The heavy, moisture-laden air, the constant threat of sudden downpours, and shifting tides create a landscape in a perpetual state of flux. Upon reaching the bottom, the investigative team still had to traverse rugged terrain to reach the black sand beach where the disturbed earth was discovered. Their arrival shattered the primordial quiet, replacing sounds of crashing waves with the crackle of police radios and heavy footfalls stepping onto volcanic sand. The transition to the wild expanse of the Hamakua coast requires a sudden shift in methodology, demanding that detectives fight not only for answers, but against the earth itself. Securing the perimeter of the makeshift grave was a critical priority, yet it was an exercise fraught with environmental complications. In a standard urban environment, establishing a crime scene involves erecting barricades and locking down a controlled space. On the black sand beach of Waipio Valley, containment is a physical impossibility. The beach is a vast, open expanse subjected to continuous, powerful forces of nature. The wind constantly whips heavy grains of volcanic glass across the shoreline, effectively sandblasting the area and erasing delicate impressions in hours. The proximity of the grave to the water line introduced the terrifying possibility of tidal interference. The Pacific Ocean does not respect police tape. The heavy surf pounds the shoreline with rhythmic, destructive force, capable of pulling away massive volumes of sand and anything buried within it. Investigators had to work with frantic urgency to document the undisturbed surface of the grave before elements could compromise it further. They meticulously photographed the disturbed contours of the sand, noting the exact dimensions and depth of the unnatural mound. Every grain of sand and every subtle variation in topography was scrutinized for clues. However, the harsh reality of the coastal environment meant any fragile trace evidence had likely been obliterated by wind, salt spray, and rain long before beachgoers stumbled upon the site. The natural world had unwittingly acted as an accomplice, systematically destroying the forensic footprint of the crime and leaving detectives to extract answers from a sanitized expanse of volcanic earth. Once surface documentation was complete, the agonizingly slow and delicate process of exhumation began. Digging a body out of heavy, wet sand is an exhausting, psychologically taxing endeavor requiring surgical precision to avoid damaging the remains or destroying potential evidence trapped within the grave. As technicians carefully removed the dark layers of basalt, the true, horrifying reality of the situation was gradually revealed. The individual buried in the sand had been subjected to the brutal, unyielding biological realities of death in a tropical environment. Official police reports noted the body was in a state of advanced decomposition. The intense, radiating heat absorbed by the black sand, combined with extreme moisture of the coastal climate, creates a hyper-accelerated environment for decay. The human form had been fundamentally broken down, subjected to the ravages of time, heat, and the complex ecosystem of the shoreline. The visual state of the remains indicated, without a shadow of a doubt, that the victim had not been killed on the afternoon of June the 1st. The timeline of death stretched backward, indicating the body had been resting in this shallow tomb for a significant period before discovery. The advanced state of decay presented a massive roadblock for investigators. The face, which serves as the primary marker of human identity, had been completely eradicated by the decomposition process. There were no recognizable features, no distinct physical characteristics, and no immediate visual cues to help detectives. The killer had chosen this location for its profound isolation and its natural capacity to destroy identity, weaponizing the environment to ensure the victim remained nameless beneath the dark sand. Following the complete exhumation and meticulous documentation of the empty grave, the investigative team faced the grim logistical challenge of transporting the heavily decomposed remains out of the remote valley. Placing the body into a transport bag and securing it for the steep ascent was a somber, silent procedure performed under the oppressive atmosphere of the coastal landscape. The journey back up the treacherous, winding road of the 2,000-foot cliff was a stark reversal of their initial arrival. Authorities were now leaving the untamed beauty of Waipio Valley, carrying with them physical evidence of a profound, unsolved tragedy. The transport vehicle slowly navigated the extreme inclines and tight corners, moving away from crashing waves and the dense rainforest, heading toward the concrete reality of modern medical infrastructure. Their destination was Hilo Medical Center, located miles away on the windward coast of the island. The journey across the Hawaii Belt Road, winding through rural communities, served as a stark transition from the natural isolation of the valley to the clinical environment of the morgue. Inside the sterile rooms of Hilo Medical Center, the victim would be transferred from the jurisdiction of crime scene investigators to the domain of forensic pathologists. The burden of finding answers shifted from analyzing shifting sands of the beach to analyzing biological realities of the heavily degraded remains. The body, subjected to the harsh forces of the tropical environment, would now be subjected to rigorous scrutiny of modern forensic science in a desperate attempt to reclaim the identity the killer tried to erase. Inside the autopsy suite of Hilo Medical Center, examiners confronted a daunting forensic puzzle. The advanced state of decomposition eliminated the possibility of a traditional, visual identification. The features that loved ones would recognize, distinct facial structures, and identifying marks defining a physical presence had been lost to the elements of the black sand beach. Standard protocols for establishing identity had to be bypassed for more complex, scientifically demanding techniques. In the absence of facial recognition, forensic experts turned to the intricate, deeply specialized science of friction ridge analysis, specifically the recovery and matching of fingerprints. Extracting viable fingerprints from a body in an advanced stage of decay is a delicate, highly technical procedure. The skin on the hands often begins to slip or break down entirely as biological structures fail. Technicians at the medical center had to employ specialized chemical treatments and meticulous physical manipulation to rehydrate and preserve whatever fragile remnants of the epidermal layer still existed on the fingertips of the deceased. It is a painstaking, microscopic search for a single, readable ridge pattern that can cut through the anonymity imposed by death and decay. After hours of careful, methodical labor, the forensic team successfully managed to isolate and lift a viable fingerprint from the devastated remains. This fragile, microscopic pattern of ridges and whorls was then processed and run through available law enforcement databases, initiating a search for a match that would finally give the victim back their name. The agonizing wait for the fingerprint results represented a suspended moment in the investigation. Detectives knew without a name, there could be no suspect, no motive, and no justice. When the match returned, the sterile data output transformed the anonymous biological remains into a recognized human life. The intricate ridges lifted from the decomposed skin matched the records of a 22-year-old male. The victim was identified as Matthew Joel Peak. The revelation of his name sent a shockwave through the investigative team and, eventually, through the local community. The young man known for his frequent travels across the island, the familiar face who relied on hitchhiking routes between Waipio, Hilo, and Puna, was no longer missing or transient. He was dead. The scientific confirmation of his identity closed the agonizing chapter of the unknown victim, but immediately ripped open a massive, complex void of new questions. By matching the fingerprint and proving the remains belonged to Matthew Joel Peak, authorities successfully defeated the killer's attempt to erase the victim's existence. The earth yielded its terrible secret, the laboratory confirmed the terrible truth, and the young man from the valley was formally, scientifically brought back into the light. However, knowing his name was merely the foundational step in an overwhelming investigative mountain. The successful identification transitioned the focus of the police department from the desperate task of figuring out who was buried in the black sand to the infinitely more complex task of figuring out how he died, why he was targeted, and who exactly was responsible for violently extinguishing his life. The identification of Matthew Joel Peak brought a fleeting moment of clarity to an otherwise impenetrable investigation, but that clarity was immediately overshadowed by the agonizing wait for a definitive medical conclusion. For over 2 months following the discovery on the 1st of June, the official cause of his death remained a haunting question mark, obscured by the severe decomposition of his remains. Detectives were forced into a state of investigative paralysis, unable to fully define the parameters of the crime they were attempting to solve. This agonizing limbo finally broke on the 2nd of August, 1999, when the medical examiner officially finalized the autopsy report and delivered a devastating, definitive ruling. The complex physiological puzzle presented by the degraded remains had finally been deciphered, revealing a chilling narrative of violence. The medical examiner concluded that Matthew did not succumb to exposure, he did not suffer a fatal accidental fall in the treacherous valley, and he was not the victim of a random medical emergency. The official cause of death was determined to be asphyxia. Furthermore, the report definitively classified the manner of death as a homicide, confirming that his demise was the direct consequence of a deliberate, violent act committed by another human being. This classification radically shifted the entire trajectory of the police response. The confirmation of asphyxiation added a profoundly dark and terrifying layer to the young man's final moments. Unlike a shooting or a hit and run, which can occur from a distance or in a fleeting second of chaos, asphyxiation is an inherently intimate, sustained, and deeply personal method of killing. It requires the perpetrator to be in close physical proximity to the victim, actively overpowering their natural instinct to survive and breathe. It is an act that demands physical force, horrific intent, and a chilling, sustained effort to completely extinguish a human life. The realization that Matthew had been subjected to this specific brand of close-quarters violence on the lonely stretches of the Big Island filled the local community with a deep, pervasive sense of dread. With the autopsy confirming a brutal murder, The detectives turned their desperate attention back to the black sand beach of Waipio Valley, hoping the earth might still hold the key to identifying the killer. However, they were met with an absolute, crushing void of physical evidence. The official public disclosures from the Hawaii Police Department regarding the crime scene remain notably sparse, characterized more by what is missing than what was found. There has never been any public confirmation of a murder weapon recovered near the shallow grave. The authorities have never disclosed whether Matthew was found with any bindings, restraints, or defensive wounds that might indicate a prolonged struggle against his attacker. The profound silence surrounding the physical artifacts of the crime is largely due to the devastating efficiency of the coastal environment. The harsh, unrelenting conditions of the shoreline, the shifting volcanic sand, the extreme tropical heat, and the constant barrage of moisture had effectively sterilized the scene. Any fibers, DNA, footprints, or transient clues left by the perpetrator had been systematically dismantled and washed away by the raw power of nature. The investigators were left staring at a completely empty canvas, deprived of the foundational forensic building blocks that typically anchor a homicide investigation. The killer had successfully leveraged the immense, destructive power of the isolated valley to completely erase their physical presence from the narrative, leaving law enforcement officers blindly searching for a phantom who had struck in the shadows and vanished without leaving a single trace behind in the dark earth. Deprived of a forensic roadmap, the investigation was forced to rely entirely on the fragile, often unreliable architecture of human memory and circumstantial tracking. The detectives embarked on the monumental task of retracing Matthew's final days, attempting to map his erratic, hitchhiking movements across the sprawling eastern half of the Big Island. They desperately needed to reconstruct his timeline, to pinpoint the exact moment he vanished from the public eye and entered the lethal orbit of his killer. This required plunging deep into the local transit culture, interviewing countless residents, commuters, and store owners along the Hawaii Belt Road. They focused intensely on his known routes, specifically the long, winding highways connecting the ancient isolation of Waipio Valley with the bustling, rain-swept streets of Hilo and the rugged, off-grid subdivisions of Puna. The detectives were searching for the crucial, missing puzzle piece, the identity of the person who offered Matthew his final ride. They needed to find the driver who pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, unlocked their passenger door, and unknowingly or intentionally set the stage for a brutal murder. However, tracking a young, highly mobile hitchhiker who relied entirely on the spontaneous generosity of strangers proved to be an almost impossible endeavor. Matthew was a familiar face, constantly moving between disparate microcultures, crossing paths with dozens of unknown individuals every single week. Disentangling the harmless, everyday interactions from the single, fatal encounter required a level of surveillance and community testimony that simply did not exist. The vast, open spaces of the island provided a perfect cover for the predator, allowing them to intercept the young man, commit the atrocity, and disappear back into the sprawling traffic without drawing any suspicion. As the weeks turned into months, the crushing weight of the investigative bottlenecks began to stall the momentum of the case, transforming an active pursuit into a slow, agonizing crawl. The reality of the situation was bleak and unyielding. There were absolutely zero direct witnesses to the crime, and there were no named suspects publicly identified by the Hawaii Police Department. Even if detectives harbored private suspicions about certain individuals within the transient communities of Hilo or Puna, they severely lacked the concrete, admissible evidence required to pursue a formal arrest or a grand jury indictment. The case became trapped in a paralyzing web of unanswered questions that continued to haunt the investigators. Who exactly did Matthew meet in the chaotic hours leading up to his asphyxiation? Was he actually murdered on the black sand beach of Waipio Valley, overpowered by someone he had traveled with down the steep cliff road, or was he killed in a completely different location, perhaps in a vehicle on the highway or in a remote house in Puna, and subsequently transported to the valley solely for the purpose of concealment? The logistics of moving a body down into that specific valley suggest a perpetrator deeply familiar with the punishing terrain, yet no solid connection could be established. Furthermore, the motive remained a complete, impenetrable mystery. Was this a crime of sudden, explosive passion, a robbery gone terribly wrong, or the calculated act of a predatory individual hunting vulnerable travelers on the remote highways? The police were even unable to definitively confirm whether they were looking for a solitary killer acting alone or a group of individuals who had collectively participated in the violence and the subsequent cover-up. The lack of resolution on these four critical fronts, the location of the murder, the identity of the last contact, the underlying motive, and the number of perpetrators, created an insurmountable barrier to justice. The intense energy of the initial response gradually faded, replaced by the grim administrative reality of an unsolved homicide. The files detailing the discovery, the autopsy, and the fruitless interviews were consolidated, categorized, and moved into the permanent archives of the police department. The investigation into the brutal asphyxiation of a 22-year-old local resident did not end with a dramatic courtroom revelation or a triumphant arrest. It ended with a quiet, agonizing fade into bureaucratic stagnation. The inability to break through the silence of the community and the sterilized void of the crime scene ensured that the person responsible for burying Matthew Joel Peak in the black sand remained completely free. Protected by the sprawling geography of the Big Island and the devastating lack of physical evidence, the case was officially designated as cold, standing as a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes, despite the best efforts of law enforcement, a killer can successfully navigate the shadows, exploit the vulnerabilities of an open, trusting community, and walk away entirely untouched by the consequences of their unimaginable violence. In the conventional architecture of a true crime narrative, the transition from the chaos of an active investigation to the structured resolution of the legal system is typically marked by the solemn, authoritative environment of a courtroom. We are culturally conditioned to expect a climax where the frantic energy of the police manhunt, the grim realities of the autopsy suite, and the scattered fragments of circumstantial evidence are finally contained and organized within the austere, wood-paneled walls of the judicial system. We anticipate the sharp strike of the judge's gavel, the adversarial drama of seasoned prosecutors and defense attorneys battling over the nuances of forensic data, the emotional, often devastating testimony of witnesses taking the stand, and the ultimate, definitive pronouncement of a jury delivering a binding verdict of guilt or innocence. This is the fundamental societal promise of justice. It is the established mechanism through which order is theoretically restored to a community after a profound, irreversible violation of human life. However, the deep tragedy of Matthew Joel Peak fundamentally and completely subverts this expected, comforting arc. For Case F. 96184, there is no courtroom, there is no judge presiding over an elevated bench. There is no jury of peers deliberating the weight of circumstantial evidence in a locked room, and there is absolutely no prosecutor standing at a wooden podium demanding legal accountability for the violent, malicious asphyxiation of a 22-year-old man. The transition away from the isolated black sand beach of Waipio Valley did not lead the investigators to a courthouse in the coastal city of Hilo. Instead, it led them directly into a profound, inescapable, and completely paralyzing legal vacuum. The complete absence of a trial in this narrative is not merely a missing chapter or a minor procedural footnote. It is the central, defining trauma of the entire decades-long ordeal. It represents the ultimate failure of the system to balance the scales for a life that was violently extinguished in the shadows, leaving a massive, gaping void where societal accountability, legal consequences, and familial closure should rightfully exist. In the American criminal justice system, the legal threshold for depriving a citizen of their liberty and subjecting them to a high-stakes murder trial is exceptionally, intentionally high. To secure a formal indictment and initiate the trial process, law enforcement authorities must present a grand jury with sufficient, compelling evidence that establishes undeniable probable cause, firmly linking a specific, named individual to the specific, violent act of murder. In the agonizing case of Matthew Peak, the brutal, unyielding reality of the investigation, the thoroughly sanitized coastal crime scene, the absolute lack of a recovered murder weapon, the complete absence of eyewitnesses to the violence, and the inability to definitively trace the victim's final hitchhiking ride meant that this critical legal threshold could simply never be breached. The detectives of the Hawaii Police Department may have generated localized theories during their intense months of fieldwork. They may have cast highly suspicious glances at certain transient elements traversing the winding roads of the Puna and Hilo districts. And they may have even conducted intense, closed-door interrogations with individuals who had previously crossed paths with the young hitchhiker. But internal suspicion, no matter how strong, logically sound, or instinctively accurate it might feel to an investigator, is entirely distinct from admissible legal proof. A prosecutor cannot bring a capital case to trial based solely on a suspect's geographical proximity to the valley or a detective's hunch about a driver's erratic demeanor during an interview. They cannot indict a phantom, and they cannot prosecute a shadow. The foundational constitutional protections designed to prevent the wrongful conviction of the innocent simultaneously and tragically served as an impenetrable legal shield for Matthew's killer. Because the harsh elements of nature had successfully destroyed the delicate forensic bridge between the victim and the perpetrator, the entire legal apparatus was rendered entirely impotent. The killer was perfectly insulated by the very justice system designed to capture them, protected by the absolute lack of physical data and the sprawling, silent geography of the Big Island. Consequently, no arrests were ever made in connection with the crime. No cold metal handcuffs were ever placed on a suspect's wrists, no booking photographs or mugshots were ever taken in a precinct holding cell. And no individual was ever forced to stand before a robed judge and enter a formal plea for the malicious asphyxiation that occurred on or near the northern Hamakua coast. When a homicide investigation violently collides with this type of impenetrable legal wall, it undergoes a quiet, bureaucratic transformation that is perhaps just as chilling and dehumanizing as the crime itself. Case F. 96184 was never officially closed by the authorities. In the strict lexicon of law enforcement, a closed case implies a definitive resolution, a successful conviction by a jury, an acquittal after a trial, or the confirmed death of the primary suspect. Matthew's case, instead, transitioned into the agonizing, perpetual purgatory of a cold case. This specific designation is a formal, administrative acknowledgement by the police department that all active, viable leads have been completely exhausted and no further forward momentum is currently possible. The daily, intensive manpower dedicated to tracing the hitchhiking routes, analyzing the local transit data, and interviewing the coastal communities is gradually withdrawn, reluctantly reassigned to fresh emergencies, new missing persons, and new acts of violence that inevitably demand the department's immediate, finite attention. The physical files, the grim autopsy photographs documenting the severe decomposition, the complex fingerprint analysis that ultimately restored his identity, the frantic initial field reports from the beachgoers on the black sand beach, and the thick transcripts of entirely fruitless witness interviews are cataloged, placed into cardboard storage boxes, and transferred to the silent, climate-controlled archives of the Criminal Investigation Division. They sit on metal shelves, gathering dust in the dark, representing a suspended state of grief and unpunished violence. A cold case is essentially a living document trapped in a state of indefinite suspended animation, perpetually waiting for an external, highly unlikely catalyst, a sudden, guilt-ridden confession, an unforeseen, miraculous advancement in forensic DNA technology, or a crisis of conscience from a silent accomplice to shock it back into active pursuit. For a quarter of a century, the official file bearing Matthew Peake's name has existed entirely within this bureaucratic twilight zone, serving as a constant, silent reminder of the department's profound inability to penetrate the veil of secrecy surrounding his death, and acting as a permanent placeholder for a trial that has never materialized. The profound absence of a trial and the subsequent cold case status carry massive psychological ramifications that extend far beyond the immediate circle of the victim's family, slowly seeping into the very cultural fabric of the Big Island. When a brutal, Intimate homicide goes entirely unanswered when the perpetrator successfully evades the massive mechanisms of justice without facing a single public accusation. It fractures the foundational trust of the local community. For the residents of Waipio Valley, Hilo, and Puna, the terrifying knowledge that a killer operated successfully within their interconnected networks, utilizing their shared highways to facilitate a murder, created a lingering, pervasive anxiety. Matthew was not a stranger to these roads. He was a familiar, benign presence who actively participated in the highly normalized, localized economy of hitchhiking. The horrifying fact that his reliance on his neighbors was met with fatal, calculated violence, and that the architect of that violence faced absolutely zero legal consequences, inherently altered the way residents viewed the open road and the strangers traveling upon it. The person who brutally strangled the 22-year-old might have been the person standing in line at the local Hilo grocery store the very next day, the anonymous driver idling at a traffic light on the Hawaii Belt Road, or a seemingly quiet neighbor living entirely off-grid in the dense, volcanic jungles of the Puna district. The complete lack of a named suspect meant that everyone was a potential suspect, fundamentally poisoning the communal atmosphere. Furthermore, the lack of a trial meant the community was entirely denied the psychological catharsis of public accountability. They were denied the opportunity to look the killer in the eye in a crowded courtroom, to finally hear the grim, factual details explaining the underlying motive, and to witness the formal, societal condemnation of the abhorrent act. Instead, they were left to navigate a beautiful landscape that had been permanently shadowed by an unsolved atrocity, forced to accept the terrifying reality that in this specific instance, the profound, majestic isolation of the island had successfully harbored a murderer, allowing them to blend seamlessly back into the rhythm of daily life, while the young victim remained trapped in the silent permanence of an archival box. As we examine the grim, unyielding accounting of the present day, the judicial ledger for the murder of Matthew Joel Peak remains completely and devastatingly blank. Well over a quarter of a century has evaporated into the tropical air since the afternoon the disturbed sand was discovered by the shoreline, yet the official status of the legal investigation is virtually identical to what it was in the late summer of 1999. There is still no primary suspect officially named or actively pursued by the Hawaii Police Department. There is still no individual sitting in a concrete prison cell serving a mandated sentence for the violent asphyxiation of the 22-year-old hitchhiker. There is still no prosecutor preparing a detailed dossier for a grand jury indictment, and there is still no judge scheduling a preliminary hearing on the court docket. The complete and total lack of judicial progression is a stark, unyielding monument to the terrifying effectiveness of the killer's initial concealment strategy. The absolute forensic void created by the black sand beach and the relentless power of the Pacific Ocean proved to be an insurmountable defense attorney, successfully arguing for the perpetrator's permanent, unquestioned freedom through the sheer, natural destruction of physical evidence. The tragic case of File F-9618 exists entirely outside the structured walls of the courtroom, functioning not as a testament to the eventual triumph of the American legal system, but as a haunting, definitive case study of its extreme limitations. It serves as a grim, persistent reminder that while the law dictates that murder is the ultimate transgression demanding the ultimate consequence, the chaotic physical environment and the sprawling, disconnected geography of a place like the Big Island can, on rare and terrifying occasions, completely override the pursuit of justice, ensuring that the only entity that will ever truly hold the complete, unvarnished truth of what happened to Matthew Joel Peak on that final day is the ancient, silent, and unforgiving earth of Waipio Valley itself. The passage of time is the most relentless and impartial force in a criminal investigation, acting as both an eraser of physical evidence and a heavy psychological weight upon those left waiting for answers. More than a quarter of a century has now evaporated into the humid tropical atmosphere since that fateful afternoon on the 1st of June, 1999, when the frantic beachgoers first noticed the unnaturally disturbed patch of black sand near the shoreline of Waipio Valley. 25 years is a massive, generational expanse of time that fundamentally alters the landscape of human existence. The world that Matthew Joel Peak inhabited has been entirely transformed by the relentless march of technological advancement, shifting cultural paradigms, and the inevitable cycle of life and death that shapes the Big Island of Hawaii. The analog era in which he hitched rides along the winding coastal highways, relying on the localized, informal network of passing drivers, has been largely replaced by a hyper-connected, digital society that he never had the opportunity to witness. Entire generations have been born, grown to adulthood, and established their own lives within the deeply isolated communities of the Hamakua Coast, Hilo, and Puna, completely unaware of the profound violence that once occurred in the shadows of the 2,000-foot cliffs they call home. The raw, volcanic geography of the island itself has continued its ancient, restless evolution, with tectonic shifts, heavy seasonal rains, and the ceaseless, rhythmic pounding of the Pacific Ocean continuously reshaping the shoreline where the young man was violently discarded. Yet, amidst all this profound, sweeping change, the core tragedy of Case F. 96184 remains entirely frozen in place, utterly immune to the passage of decades. The agonizing mystery surrounding his brutal asphyxiation is exactly as unresolved today as it was the moment the forensic technicians finally managed to lift a viable fingerprint from his heavily decomposed remains. Time has not offered any organic resolution, nor has it diminished the profound injustice of a 22-year-old life being maliciously extinguished and buried in a shallow, makeshift grave. For the individual or individuals responsible for this heinous act, these 25 years represent an uninterrupted, stolen era of freedom. While Matthew remains permanently locked in his youth, forever a 22-year-old navigating the rugged roads of a bygone era, his killer has been permitted the supreme luxury of experiencing the decades that were violently stolen from their victim. They have been allowed to age, to potentially build a family, to witness the changing of the seasons, and to blend seamlessly into the sprawling, anonymous fabric of the world, entirely unburdened by legal consequence or public accountability. This glaring, horrific disparity between the dead and the living is the defining agony of a cold case, a constant, silent scream echoing through the archives of the Hawaii Police Department. However, the authorities have vehemently refused to surrender the narrative to this absolute silence. In the year 2024, marking the grim 25th anniversary of the discovery in the Valley of the Kings, the investigative apparatus initiated a renewed, highly publicized offensive against the stagnation of the case. Recognizing that the original detectives have long since retired and the original physical evidence has been fully analyzed to its absolute limits, the current generation of law enforcement pivoted their strategy to directly engage the one resource that remains viable: the collective memory and conscience of the public. The Hawaii Police Department deliberately resurrected Case F. 96184 from the shadows of the climate-controlled archives, prominently featuring Matthew's story in their specialized Unsolved Homicides initiative. This modern push for justice is not merely an administrative exercise. It is a desperate, strategic appeal broadcast into the digital ether, designed to reach anyone whose life intersected with the transient, hitchhiking culture of the Big Island in the late 1990s. The department released a comprehensive public plea, utilizing video formats and modern distribution channels to reintroduce the face and the tragic fate of the young Waipio Valley resident to a community that may have forgotten him, or to a younger demographic that never knew his name. By publishing the stark facts of his murder and the agonizing lack of resolution, investigators are actively attempting to shake the psychological foundations of those who might harbor the hidden truth. The core, unyielding message delivered by the detectives is explicitly clear: there is absolutely no statute of limitations on the crime of murder. The passage of 25 years does not grant legal immunity, it does not lessen the severity of the asphyxiation, and it certainly does not close the book on the active pursuit of the perpetrator. Law enforcement operates on the fundamental psychological premise that a secret as dark and heavy as a malicious homicide is incredibly difficult to carry in absolute solitude for a quarter of a century. Over the span of 2.5 decades, allegiances inevitably fracture, marriages dissolve, criminal partnerships turn hostile, and the heavy burden of concealed guilt can slowly corrode the human conscience. The authorities are banking on the reality that the social landscape surrounding the killer has drastically shifted since 1999. Someone, somewhere on the sprawling expanse of the Big Island or perhaps far beyond its volcanic shores, holds the critical, missing fragment of information that can finally bridge the gap between the sanitized black sand beach and the identity of the murderer. It might be an individual who provided a ride to Matthew on a forgotten afternoon, a person who witnessed a disturbing altercation on the shoulder of the Hawaii Belt Road, or an associate who was forced to listen to a drunken, guilt-ridden confession in the years following the crime. The police are urging these potential witnesses, who may have been silenced by fear, misplaced loyalty, or a simple desire for self-preservation in their youth, to finally step forward and break the paralyzing silence that has protected the perpetrator for an entire generation. Every single new lead, regardless of how seemingly insignificant or historically distant it may appear, is rigorously vetted and investigated by the dedicated detectives of the Unsolved Homicides Unit. They understand that in a case starved of forensic evidence, a single, credible human voice can be the explosive catalyst required to shatter the decades of stagnation and finally initiate the long-delayed process of legal accountability. The renewed 2024 campaign is a testament to the enduring commitment of the authorities, a public declaration that the young man whose body was violently discarded in the coastal elements has not been abandoned by the justice system that failed to protect him in life. As we reflect upon the chilling entirety of this narrative, we are forced to confront the profound vulnerability inherent in the human condition, particularly when exposed to the vast, indifferent forces of nature and the hidden malice of opportunistic predators. Matthew Joel Peak was not a statistical anomaly. He was a vibrant, recognized member of a unique microculture, a young man who trusted his community enough to stand on the edge of a highway and offer his absolute vulnerability to passing strangers. His lifestyle was built on a foundation of implicit communal trust, a trust that was violently, fatally betrayed in the deep shadows of the Hamakua coast. The ultimate tragedy of his story is not merely the gruesome nature of his asphyxiation or the horrifying desecration of his remains in the makeshift beach grave, but the enduring, suffocating silence that has followed in the wake of his destruction. Waipio Valley, with its towering, emerald green cliffs, its cascading waterfalls, and its thunderous, mesmerizing ocean waves, remains one of the most breathtakingly beautiful locations on the face of the earth. Yet, for those who know the tragic history of Case F. 96184, that unparalleled beauty is forever intertwined with a profound sense of melancholy and unresolved dread. The dark volcanic sands that stretch across the remote shoreline continue to absorb the intense heat of the tropical sun, entirely indifferent to the terrible secret they briefly held 25 years ago. The profound isolation that constantly draws hikers and off-grid residents to the valley floor is the exact same isolation that a highly calculated killer successfully weaponized to systematically erase a human life. Until the day a crucial witness finally finds the courage to speak, or until the killer themselves is unable to bear the crushing psychological weight of their hidden atrocity, the true story of Matthew's final desperate moments will remain securely trapped within the impenetrable natural fortress of the Valley of the Kings. His name remains permanently etched into the cold case files, serving as a persistent, haunting echo demanding justice from a world that has continuously moved forward, while his legacy stands as a solemn, heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and the terrifying shadows that can exist even in the most beautiful corners of paradise. The Hawaii Police Department continues to wait for that one phone call, that single piece of correspondence that will finally illuminate the darkness. Until then, the memory of Matthew Joel Peak belongs to the wind, the rain, and the black sand, an eternal vigil kept by the island itself, waiting for the truth to finally surface. To truly comprehend the enduring legacy of a cold case like that of Matthew Joel Peak, one must look beyond the immediate boundaries of the police file and examine the profound, invisible scars left upon the cultural and psychological landscape of the island itself. The tragedy of Case F. 96184 is not merely an isolated incident of violence trapped in the amber of 1999. It is a defining fracture in the collective innocence of the Big Island community. In the decades that have unfurled since the devastating discovery on the black sands of Waipio Valley, the very fabric of social trust that once defined the rural, interconnected highways of Hawaii has undergone a quiet, yet irreversible transformation. The culture of hitchhiking, which Matthew relied upon as a primary means of navigating his sprawling, majestic world, was once viewed as a communal pillar of mutual assistance, a testament to the inherent goodness of neighbors helping neighbors across vast volcanic distances. Today, that practice has been largely overshadowed by a pervasive, lingering caution. The realization that a predator could so effortlessly weaponize the open road, intercepting a familiar and trusting 22-year-old only to brutally extinguish his life and discard his body in the coastal elements, introduced a chilling element of suspicion into the everyday interactions of island residents. Parents who once thumbed rides in their own youth now actively discourage their children from standing on the gravel shoulders of the Hawaii Belt Road. The empty passenger seat, once an invitation for spontaneous connection and shared journeys, has increasingly become a sealed, private sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the invisible barriers erected in the aftermath of unpunished violence. This cultural shift is the secondary, ongoing tragedy of Matthew's death. The killer not only stole the future of a vibrant young man, but they also systematically assassinated a deeply ingrained aspect of the island's communal spirit, leaving behind a legacy of apprehension that continues to echo along the winding, rain-swept stretches of the Hamakua coast and the dense, off-grid subdivisions of Puna. The sprawling geography of the island, once a canvas for boundless exploration and freedom, is now subtly inscribed with the terrifying knowledge that it can simultaneously serve as a perfect, impenetrable hunting ground for those who wish to do profound harm. This geographic reality places an unimaginable psychological burden upon the dedicated men and women of the Hawaii Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division who are tasked with inheriting the ghosts of the past. For the modern detectives who periodically pull the heavy, dust-covered cardboard boxes of Case F. 96184 from the climate-controlled archives, the investigation is an exercise in enduring frustration and solemn duty. They're forced to navigate a labyrinth of decayed evidence, attempting to extract new meaning from faded crime scene photographs, yellowing autopsy reports, and transcripts of interviews conducted with witnesses whose memories have been inevitably distorted by the relentless passage of a quarter-century. They must confront the agonizing reality that the initial forensic void created by the shifting, unforgiving sands of the shoreline remains an almost insurmountable obstacle. Every time they open the file, they're staring directly into the terrifying efficiency of a perfectly executed concealment. Yet, despite the crushing weight of these historical bottlenecks, the investigators refuse to succumb to institutional apathy. They understand that a cold case is not a closed case, and that the bureaucratic designation of an unsolved homicide does not diminish the profound moral imperative to seek justice for the victim. The investigators operate on the fundamental belief that the truth is rarely destroyed entirely. It is usually just scattered, waiting for the right catalyst to bring the fragments back into alignment. They study the sociological dynamics of secrets, knowing that the burden of concealing a malicious asphyxiation is a toxic, corrosive force that inevitably degrades the human conscience over time. Alliances that were forged in the shadow of the crime in 1999 have likely shattered. Marriages have ended in bitter divorces, criminal partnerships have dissolved into violent paranoia, and the individuals who may have inadvertently provided an alibi or silently witnessed a crucial piece of the puzzle are now in entirely different phases of their lives. The detectives actively bank on this passage of time, hoping that the shifting sands of human loyalty will eventually reveal the hidden bedrock of truth. They understand that someone, somewhere, is carrying the agonizing weight of this knowledge, perhaps rationalizing their silence out of misplaced loyalty, deep-seated fear of retaliation, or a desperate, selfish desire to preserve their own constructed reality. The renewed push to publicize Matthew's story is a direct, calculated assault on that wall of silence. It is a strategic attempt to penetrate the psychological defenses of those who know what happened, forcing them to confront the stark, inescapable reality of the young life that was violently stolen and the family that was permanently shattered. The authorities are demanding that the silent accomplices, the passive witnesses, and the keepers of the secret finally recognize that their continued silence is an active, ongoing participation in the desecration of Matthew's memory. The appeal is rooted in the universal human desire for redemption and the fundamental understanding that carrying a monstrous secret to the grave is a spiritual death sentence in its own right. As the modern era continues to rapidly evolve, introducing unprecedented advancements in digital surveillance, genealogical DNA profiling, and complex data analysis, the landscape of criminal investigation is fundamentally changing, offering small, flickering beacons of hope for cases that were once deemed hopelessly stagnant. While the harsh elements of Waipio Valley may have destroyed the traditional biological markers at the immediate crime scene, the modern detectives are exploring every conceivable peripheral avenue, reevaluating old transit logs, examining historical communication records, and cross-referencing the names of transient individuals who were known to frequent the same hitchhiking corridors as the victim during that fateful summer. They are meticulously searching for a single, overlooked anomaly, a microscopic inconsistency that could serve as the loose thread required to unravel the entire tapestry of deception. This exhaustive, seemingly impossible pursuit is a testament to the enduring value placed upon a single human life within the justice system. It is a definitive statement that a young man from a remote, isolated valley, who lived entirely off the grid and relied on the kindness of passing strangers, is inherently worthy of the exact same relentless, uncompromising pursuit of justice as any other citizen. The continued existence of his open file is a refusal to let his identity be permanently erased by the violence of his final moments. It is a promise to the community, to his memory, and to the chilling reality of the unknown killer that the search will simply never be abandoned. The majestic, terrifying beauty of Waipio Valley remains entirely indifferent to this human struggle, functioning as a massive, silent monument to the power of nature and the insignificance of mortal endeavors. The black sands continue to absorb the tropical heat, the ancient waterfalls continue to carve their paths through the emerald cliffs, and the relentless Pacific tides continue their rhythmic, destructive assault on the shoreline, completely unaffected by the tragedy they helped to conceal. The environment offers no apologies, no clues, and absolutely no closure. It simply exists, a breathtakingly beautiful and fundamentally ruthless backdrop to a deeply unresolved human nightmare. But humanity, unlike the unforgiving forces of geology, is bound by a moral obligation to remember, to question, and to demand accountability. The story of Matthew Joel Peak, the 22-year-old who loved the open road and trusted the people of the Big Island, will not be allowed to simply fade into the mythological ether of the Hamakua coast. It remains a raw, bleeding wound in the historical record of Hawaii, a constant, urgent reminder that the pursuit of truth must outlast the forces of decay. The Hawaii Police Department's Unsolved Homicides Unit stands as the final, unyielding line of defense against the absolute erasure of his existence, maintaining a permanent, watchful vigil over the cold case file, waiting with infinite patience for the day when the shadows finally break. The silence is irreparably shattered, and the shadow in the sand is finally brought into the harsh, uncompromising light of justice. The ultimate tragedy of an unresolved homicide does not merely reside in the brutal cessation of a human life, but in the agonizing perpetual suspension of truth that forever suffocates the community left behind in the chaotic wake of the violence. When we deeply examine the sprawling, haunting narrative of Matthew Joel Peak and the devastating contents of Police File F-96184, we are fundamentally forced to confront the terrifying limits of human justice and the overwhelming indifference of the natural world. The Big Island of Hawaii, with its towering emerald cliffs, active volcanic rift zones, and endlessly crashing Pacific surf, operates on a geological timeline that renders human existence incredibly fragile and profoundly transient. The black sand beach of Waipio Valley, where his heavily decomposed remains were discovered beneath the surface on that fateful afternoon in June of 1999, continues to exist in a state of majestic, untouched isolation, completely ignorant to the horrific violation that occurred upon its
shores. The heavy, dark volcanic grains that were used to hastily conceal a brutal asphyxiation are continuously washed and reshaped by the relentless tides, creating a sanitized, pristine environment that actively mocks the desperate human desire for historical permanence and legal accountability. For 25 years, the Earth has kept the darkest secret of the Hamakua coast perfectly intact, while the human beings tasked with solving the crime have been forced to navigate a maddening labyrinth of dead ends, vanished evidence, and paralyzing silence. This specific brand of silence is not passive, but rather an active oppressive force that slowly erodes the foundational trust of the rural communities that once defined the vibrant hitchhiking culture of the island. Every time a resident of Hilo or Puna drives along the winding rain-swept stretches of the Hawaii Belt Road, they are unknowingly traversing the exact same asphalt arteries that a killer used to seamlessly escape the consequences of their unimaginable brutality. The horrifying realization that the perpetrator was intimately familiar with the rugged landscape, possessing the precise knowledge required to navigate the treacherous 2,000-foot descent into the Valley of the Kings to dispose of their victim, suggests a predator who is completely integrated into the local environment. They were not a phantom who materialized from the mist, but a physical human being who stopped their vehicle on the gravel shoulder, unlocked their passenger door, and weaponized the inherent vulnerability of a trusting 22-year-old man who simply needed a ride. The betrayal of that localized trust is the poison that continues to contaminate the legacy of this case, transforming the sprawling, beautiful highways into corridors of lingering anxiety and unspoken suspicion. The investigators who inherited this monumental burden understand that they are fighting a war against the relentless decay of memory, where every passing year further distorts the recollections of potential witnesses and permanently buries the fragile circumstantial clues that might have once pointed toward a definitive suspect. Yet despite the crushing astronomical odds stacked against them, the law enforcement apparatus of the Hawaii Police Department refuses to completely surrender the young man to the shadows of the archival storage room. Their renewed modern offensive, utilizing the digital reach of the Unsolved Homicides Initiative, represents a profound refusal to accept defeat and a desperate, calculated attempt to penetrate the psychological armor of anyone who might be harboring the critical missing fragments of the puzzle. They operate on the fundamental psychological reality that the human conscience is an incredibly fragile vessel, uniquely ill-equipped to carry the absolute crushing weight of a concealed murder for a quarter of a century without eventually developing microscopic, catastrophic fractures. The authorities are patiently waiting for that inevitable fracture, hoping that the shifting allegiances of time, the burden of aging, or the sudden overwhelming desire for spiritual redemption will finally compel a silent witness, or perhaps even the killer themselves, to step forward and shatter the darkness. Until that elusive moment of revelation arrives, the narrative of Matthew Joel Peak remains an open, bleeding wound on the historical record of the Big Island, a chilling testament to the fact that absolute evil can occasionally successfully utilize the breathtaking beauty of paradise as an impenetrable shield. We are left with a haunting image of a vibrant, deeply connected 22-year-old whose life was violently interrupted, leaving behind nothing but a name scientifically extracted from the degraded epidermal ridges of a fingerprint and a hollow, empty space within a community that failed to protect him. The profound tragedy is that his final moments were defined by sheer terror and violent asphyxiation, far removed from the peaceful, off-grid existence he sought in the deep emerald embrace of the valley. We must continuously honor his memory, not by morbidly obsessing over the gruesome mechanics of his death, but by stubbornly refusing to let his identity be entirely erased by the malicious intent of an unknown predator and the endless shifting sands of the Pacific coastline.
The relentless pursuit of justice, even when mathematically improbable, is the only mechanism we possess to reaffirm the inherent supreme value of a human life, ensuring that the victim is never reduced to a mere bureaucratic statistic in a forgotten cardboard box. The story demands to be told and retold, echoing through the dense tropical rainforests and across the vast expanses of volcanic rock, serving as a permanent beacon of awareness and a stark, unyielding warning about the fragile nature of safety in a world where strangers cross paths on lonely roads. Every listener who absorbs this narrative becomes a passive custodian of his memory, carrying the weight of his unsolved murder forward into the future and subtly expanding the network of individuals who care about the fate of a young man they never had the privilege to meet. This collective remembrance is the ultimate weapon against the killer's intended goal of total erasure, ensuring that while the perpetrator may have successfully evaded the physical confines of a concrete prison cell, they will never truly, completely extinguish the light of the life they stole. As the sun continuously rises and sets over the majestic, imposing cliffs of Waipio Valley, casting long dark shadows across the exact coordinates where the disturbed earth was first noticed, the island itself remains locked in an eternal silent vigil. The roaring ocean waves pounding against the dark basalt rocks provide a constant, deafening soundtrack to a mystery that defies all logical resolution, demanding answers from a universe that remains stubbornly, tragically mute. We are ultimately forced to accept the agonizing reality that justice in its purest legal form may never actually arrive for Case F-96184, leaving the legal ledger permanently unbalanced and the scales forever tipped in favor of the anonymous architect of the violence. However, the absence of a trial, the lack of a named suspect, and the crushing weight of 25 years of stagnation do not diminish the undeniable truth that Matthew Joel Peak lived, breathed, and mattered to the world. His existence was valid, his youth was vibrant, and his brutal, unjustifiable murder remains a profound stain on the conscience of the landscape that he called home. The investigators will continue to periodically pull the files, they will continue to broadcast their desperate pleas into the digital void, and they will continue to hope against all rational expectation that the Earth will eventually yield the missing piece of the puzzle. Until that impossible day comes, we leave him there in our collective memory, standing on the edge of the Hawaii Belt Road with his thumb extended, trusting in the goodness of his fellow islanders, completely unaware of the devastating darkness that was accelerating toward him on the horizon. The shadow in the sand will permanently endure as a haunting symbol of the unknown, a tragic, deeply unsettling reminder that sometimes the most profound mysteries are buried in the most beautiful places on Earth, completely beyond the reach of human understanding and forever lost to the relentless, uncaring passage of time. The duty of the living is to never let the silence, when completely, to always keep the name of the victim spoken aloud, and to maintain the fierce, uncompromising belief that no matter how deep the grave was dug, the truth possesses an intrinsic, undeniable buoyancy that desperately wants to break through the surface of the dark volcanic earth. We must carry the story of the young hitchhiker as a solemn, sacred obligation, a promise that his violent end will not dictate his entire legacy, and that the search for the person who stole his future will continue to burn quietly, persistently in the hearts of those who refuse to forget the boy left in the Valley of the Kings. The psychological trauma inflicted by this unsolved crime extends far beyond the immediate parameters of the police investigation, weaving itself seamlessly into the cultural folklore of the Hamakua Coast, where whispered warnings about the dangers of the open road have permanently replaced the carefree attitudes of previous generations. To truly understand the magnitude of this loss, one must fully process the sheer volume of potential that was eradicated when the killer chose to wrap their hands around the throat of a young man who had his entire adult life stretching out before him, like the vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. All the miles he intended to travel, all the connections he intended to make, and all the experiences he was supposed to gather were instantaneously wiped from existence, leaving behind an agonizing void that no amount of passing time can ever truly fill. The authorities know that the killer walks freely among us, perhaps entirely consumed by the monstrous weight of their own actions, or perhaps terrifyingly detached, completely indifferent to the 25 years of sorrow they manufactured on that isolated stretch of black sand.
But the investigation will never formally close because conceding defeat to a murderer is a line that law enforcement is simply unwilling to cross, meaning the hunt for the truth will silently endure, navigating through the dense jungle of missing records, faded memories, and shifting island demographics. The resilience of the human spirit demands that we keep searching, keep questioning, and keep holding onto the fragile hope that one day a microscopic thread will be pulled, unraveling the decades of deception and finally exposing the monster who dragged a 22-year-old into the terrifying shadows of Waipio Valley. Until that ultimate moment of clarity is achieved, we remain steadfast in our dedication to the memory of Matthew Joel Peak, ensuring that the tragedy of his death never overshadows the simple, profound beauty of his existence, and honoring his spirit by refusing to let his story be swallowed whole by the unforgiving, magnificent landscape of the Big Island. The ultimate tragedy of the unsolved murder of Matthew Joel Peak transcends the immediate physical brutality of his asphyxiation and permeates the very psychological foundation of the Big Island of Hawaii, transforming a landscape of unparalleled natural majesty into a permanent monument of unresolved human suffering and lingering communal anxiety. When we deeply analyze the complete stagnation of Police File F-96184, we are forced to confront the terrifying reality that the justice system, despite its vast resources and dedicated personnel, is fundamentally vulnerable to the overwhelming destructive power of the natural environment and the calculated maliciousness of a predator who understands how to exploit that environment to achieve absolute forensic anonymity. The black sand beach of Waipio Valley, where his severely decomposed 22-year-old body was discovered by horrified beachgoers at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon on the 1st of June 1999, represents a profound paradox, acting simultaneously as one of the most breathtakingly beautiful locations on the entire planet and the grim, sterile stage for a horrific act of intimate violence. The heavy, dark volcanic grains of sand that were hastily shoveled over his lifeless form to create a shallow makeshift grave have long since been washed away and replaced by the endless, relentless rhythmic pounding of the immense Pacific Ocean, effectively erasing any physical trace of the atrocity and restoring the shoreline to a state of pristine, deceptive innocence. This constant environmental regeneration is deeply agonizing for the investigators of the Hawaii Police Department because it physically mocks their desperate search for empirical evidence, rendering the crime scene completely useless and forcing them to rely entirely upon the fragile, unreliable, and constantly fading nature of human memory to construct any semblance of a prosecutable case. The passage of more than 25 years has only accelerated this agonizing process of decay, steadily eroding the recollections of potential witnesses, distorting the contextual understanding of the local hitchhiking culture, and granting the unknown perpetrator a completely unearned stolen quarter-century of absolute freedom. While Matthew remains permanently frozen in the late 1990s, forever a vibrant 22-year-old seeking a quiet off-grid existence in the lush emerald embrace of the Valley of the Kings, the individual who violently placed their hands around his throat and deliberately extinguished his life has been permitted to seamlessly blend back into the sprawling, anonymous fabric of the world, completely unburdened by the consequences of their monstrous transgression. This glaring, unconscionable disparity between the stolen future of the victim and the unpunished existence of the killer is the central defining trauma of every cold case, but it feels especially poignant in an enclosed island ecosystem where the geographical boundaries theoretically limit the avenues of escape. The horrifying fact that the killer was likely a familiar part of the local community, someone who routinely navigated the winding, treacherous stretches of the Hawaii Belt Road and understood the specific isolating topography of the Hamakua coast, suggests a terrifying proximity to the victim prior to the fatal encounter. Matthew did not simply vanish into thin air. He stepped up to the edge of the asphalt, extended his thumb, and willingly entered the private, enclosed space of a passing vehicle, operating under the deeply ingrained societal assumption that the driver was a benign neighbor, upholding the informal communal transit system that characterized the rural districts of Hilo and Puna during that specific era.
That fundamental vulnerability, the inherent innocent trust required to survive in a sprawling, geographically disconnected community, was maliciously weaponized against him, transforming a routine journey across the island into a horrific terminal nightmare that ended with his brutal suffocation in the shadows of the towering 2,000-foot cliffs. The psychological fallout from this profound betrayal of communal trust completely shattered the perceived safety of the open road, fundamentally altering how subsequent generations of island residents view the practice of hitchhiking and permanently installing a lingering, pervasive sense of suspicion toward passing strangers. The empty passenger seat, which was once universally recognized as a symbol of shared community resources and spontaneous island hospitality, has slowly morphed into a symbol of potential danger, a physical reminder of the terrifying unpredictability of human nature and the dark secrets that can remain perfectly hidden behind the wheel of an approaching vehicle. The detectives who are currently tasked with breathing new life into this stagnant investigation fully understand the monumental historical weight of this cultural shift, recognizing that they are not merely attempting to solve a decades-old murder, but are actively fighting to restore a shattered sense of communal security and provide a long-overdue measure of profound closure to a community that has been haunted by a shadow in the sand for an entire generation. Their renewed aggressive public awareness campaign launched in the year 2024 to specifically coincide with the grim 25th anniversary of the horrifying discovery is a direct, calculated challenge to the paralyzing silence that has protected the architect of this violence for far too long. By strategically reintroducing Matthew's face's name and the stark, unyielding facts of his brutal asphyxiation to the modern digital public, the Unsolved Homicides Unit is desperately hoping to generate a sudden, uncontrollable psychological fracture within the mind of anyone who has spent the last 2.5 decades carrying the toxic, corrosive burden of this concealed atrocity. They operate on the fundamental belief that the human conscience is inherently incapable of sustaining absolute secrecy regarding a malicious murder indefinitely, and that the shifting allegiances, fracture relationships, and eventual moral awakenings brought on by the relentless passage of time will eventually produce the single crucial piece of information required to finally bridge the massive investigative gap. The police emphatically stress that there is absolutely no statute of limitations on the deliberate taking of a human life, reinforcing the terrifying reality for the perpetrator that the investigative apparatus will simply never completely abandon the pursuit regardless of how many decades slip away into the tropical atmosphere. Every single anonymous tip, every faded transit log, and every historical rumor is meticulously cross-referenced and analyzed by a new generation of investigators who are armed with advanced data management systems but are still ultimately entirely dependent upon the courage of a human witness to step forward and speak the truth. The agonizing reality of the situation is that the complete, unvarnished truth of what transpired in the chaotic final hours of Matthew's life is currently locked inside the mind of the killer and perhaps a very small circle of silent accomplices who have prioritized their own selfish self-preservation over the fundamental human requirement for justice. Until those psychological barriers are finally breached, the story of Case F-96184 will remain trapped in an agonizing state of perpetual limbo, functioning as a stark, chilling warning about the terrifying vulnerabilities of marginalized transient populations and the profound, devastating capacity for human violence that exists even in the most idyllic, isolated corners of the globe. We must fiercely resist the natural human inclination to allow unresolved tragedies to simply fade into the mythological background noise of history, actively choosing instead to maintain a constant, vigilant awareness of the young man who was violently discarded like refuse in the majestic natural cathedral of Waipio Valley. Remembering Matthew Joel Peak is not a passive exercise, it is an active, ongoing moral obligation to defiantly reject the complete erasure of his identity and to continuously reaffirm the supreme inherent value of the 22 years he spent experiencing the profound beauty and complex realities of the Big Island. His nomadic lifestyle, his reliance on the kindness of his neighbors, and his deep connection to the ancient rugged landscape of the valley floor made him a unique, vibrant thread in the cultural tapestry of Hawaii, a thread that was brutally severed, leaving behind a jagged, bleeding edge that simply refuses to heal. The absolute lack of a dramatic courtroom conclusion, a formal legal indictment, or a tearful confession does not diminish the profound significance of his existence. It simply amplifies the devastating tragedy of his unpunished death, demanding that we carry his memory forward as a solemn, sacred duty. The towering emerald cliffs will continue to stand as silent, indifferent sentinels over the dark volcanic shoreline. The heavy tropical rains will continue to wash the ancient basalt rocks, and the massive, relentless waves of the Pacific will continue to pound the exact coordinates where the disturbed Earth was first noticed, but the human community must never adopt the cold indifference of the natural world. We must continue to fiercely demand answers, to ask the difficult questions about who he met on that final fateful journey, and to hold onto the desperate, fragile hope that the dark, oppressive shadows concealing the identity of his murderer will eventually be pierced by the undeniable, piercing light of truth. Until that impossible day of reckoning finally arrives, the legacy of the young hitchhiker will remain forever intertwined with the haunting, breathtaking beauty of the Hamakua Coast, serving as a permanent, ghostly reminder that justice is not an inevitable natural occurrence, but a fragile human construct that requires our constant, unwavering, relentless pursuit to ensure that the silent victims of brutal violence are never completely forgotten by the world that failed to protect them in their most vulnerable, terrifying hour of need. The vast, unyielding geography of the Big Island of Hawaii serves as the ultimate, silent witness to the unresolved tragedy of Matthew Joel Peak, presenting a landscape so monumentally ancient and overwhelmingly powerful that it threatens to swallow the memory of human suffering entirely whole. When we stand upon the towering ridges overlooking the dense emerald expanse of Waipio Valley, we are confronting a geological formation that has existed for millions of years, carved by relentless rainfall, seismic violence, and the ceaseless, thunderous pounding of the Pacific Ocean. This environment operates on a scale of time and physical magnitude that renders the span of a single human life infinitesimally small, an incredibly brief spark of consciousness rapidly extinguished against the backdrop of eternal basalt cliffs and shifting tectonic plates. The Black Sand Beach, the exact location where the young man was violently concealed in the late spring of 1999, is a highly dynamic, ever-changing threshold between the solid earth and the chaotic sea. Every single day, the heavy coastal tides roll over that specific patch of volcanic glass, continuously reshaping the shoreline, pulling the heavy grains of sand out into the deep ocean and depositing new layers upon the beach, effectively scrubbing the terrain of any historical memory. This relentless environmental sanitization is the cruelest irony of Case F. 96184, because the very natural beauty that drew the 22-year-old victim to seek a peaceful, off-grid existence in the Valley of the Kings was ultimately weaponized to completely erase the forensic footprint of his brutal asphyxiation. The earth absorbed the trauma of his final, desperate moments and immediately began the systematic, uncaring process of burying the truth, leaving the investigative authorities with an utterly barren crime scene completely devoid of the biological evidence required to secure a conviction. The killer successfully utilized the profound isolation and the destructive natural forces of the island to commit a perfect, terrifyingly anonymous crime, ensuring that the only entity that will ever possess the complete, unvarnished knowledge of what occurred on that fateful afternoon is the silent, unforgiving landscape itself. The burden of confronting this absolute environmental silence falls squarely upon the shoulders of the detectives within the Criminal Investigation Division, professionals who are tasked with the agonizing responsibility of fighting a war against the continuous, relentless erosion of time. Inheriting a cold case like that of the young hitchhiker from Waipio Valley is akin to inheriting a heavy, permanent shadow, a constant, nagging reminder of the severe limitations inherent in the human pursuit of justice. The original investigators who first carefully navigated the steep, treacherous descent to the valley floor, who meticulously documented the disturbed, unnatural mound of sand, and who agonizingly waited for the medical examiner to confirm the violent nature of the death, have long since retired, passing the massive, unresolved psychological weight of the case down to a completely new generation of law enforcement. For these modern detectives, the investigation is a grueling exercise in archival archaeology, requiring them to constantly revisit the climate-controlled storage rooms, carefully extract the heavily weathered cardboard boxes bearing the file number F96184, and meticulously pore over decades-old field reports, faded crime scene photographs, and the transcripts of interviews conducted with individuals who are now in the twilight of their lives or have already passed away. They are forced to operate within a profoundly frustrating investigative vacuum, actively searching for a microscopic, overlooked anomaly or a subtle inconsistency in the historical record that might somehow magically bridge the massive 25-year gap between the horrific discovery on the beach and the concealed identity of the perpetrator. They know with absolute certainty that the person responsible for wrapping their hands around the throat of the trusting 22-year-old and deliberately, maliciously forcing the life from his body successfully walked away from the scene of the crime and seamlessly reintegrated themselves into society. The horrifying reality that a killer was permitted to experience the subsequent decades, to age, to breathe, and to participate in the daily rhythms of the world while their victim remained permanently locked in the youth of 1999, is the driving force that prevents the police department from ever officially closing the book on this devastating, unresolved narrative. This lack of closure radiates outward from the sterile police archives, seeping deeply into the cultural and psychological bedrock of the Hamakua Coast, fundamentally altering the way the community interacts with the sprawling, interconnected geography of the island. The brutal murder of Matthew Joel Peak was not merely the violent cessation of a single human life. It was a devastating, calculated assault on the deeply ingrained culture of localized trust that once defined the rural districts of the Big Island. The victim was a familiar, recognizable presence, a young man who routinely relied upon the informal, communal transit system of hitchhiking to traverse the immense distances between his isolated home in the valley, the commercial center of Hilo, and the rugged subdivisions of Puna. His entire lifestyle was predicated upon the beautiful, innocent assumption that the strangers navigating the winding stretches of the Hawaii Belt Road were fundamentally decent neighbors willing to share their enclosed spaces and provide safe passage to a fellow islander in need. By preying upon this specific vulnerability, the unknown assailant effectively assassinated the innocence of the open road, introducing a permanent, lingering toxin of fear and suspicion into the daily commute of every single resident. The gravel shoulders of the highway, once viewed as launching points for spontaneous connection and shared journeys, are now heavily shadowed by the terrifying historical knowledge that they can just as easily serve as the initial contact point for a fatal, predatory encounter. The community was forced to painfully reconcile the breathtaking, idyllic scenery of their island home with the horrific realization that a monster had successfully utilized their shared roads, their local knowledge, and their inherent hospitality to facilitate a cold-blooded execution and completely escape the massive machinery of the justice system. The resulting cultural shift is a silent, enduring monument to the tragedy, a collective raising of psychological defenses that permanently altered the social fabric of the island, ensuring that the legacy of the crime is measured not just in the loss of one young man, but in the permanent loss of the trusting, open community he once so fully embraced. In the face of this profound communal trauma and the seemingly insurmountable passage of a quarter century, the Hawaii Police Department's strategic decision to prominently feature the case on their Unsolved Homicides platform in the year 2024 represents a desperate, necessary refusal to surrender to the darkness. This renewed public awareness campaign is an aggressive, calculated attempt to agitate the stagnant waters of the investigation, utilizing the expansive reach of modern digital communication to broadcast the agonizing details of the asphyxiation to a global audience in the desperate hope of finally shaking loose a hidden, dormant memory. The authorities operate on the fundamental, psychological truth that the human mind is uniquely ill-equipped to carry the massive, corrosive weight of a concealed murder without eventually seeking some form of release. They understand that over the span of 25 years, the social dynamics surrounding the killer have inevitably shifted, protective loyalties have fractured, marriages have dissolved, criminal associations have turned bitter, and the individuals who may have inadvertently provided a false alibi, witnessed a suspicious interaction on the highway, or heard a drunken, guilt-ridden confession are now living entirely different lives. The investigators are actively appealing to the consciences of these silent, peripheral figures, emphatically demanding that they finally abandon their self-serving secrecy and step forward to provide the critical, missing piece of the puzzle that will allow the legal system to finally hold the perpetrator accountable. They stress with absolute, unwavering clarity that there is no statute of limitations on the crime of murder, and that the passage of time does not grant any form of legal or moral amnesty to the person who committed the atrocity on the black sand beach. Every single new piece of information, regardless of how historically distant or seemingly insignificant it may appear, is treated with the utmost urgency, rigorously vetted by detectives who are desperately waiting for the singular, explosive revelation that will finally shatter the agonizing decades of silence and ignite the long-delayed process of absolute, uncompromising justice. Ultimately, the enduring narrative of Matthew Joel Peak demands our continuous, unwavering attention because it serves as a profound, chilling testament to the fragile nature of human existence and the terrifying, arbitrary nature of unchecked violence. We are morally obligated to stubbornly refuse the erasure of his identity, to ensure that he is never reduced to a mere bureaucratic file number gathering dust in a forgotten archival storage box, and to actively maintain a constant, vigilant awareness of the 22-year-old who loved the raw, untamed beauty of the Big Island. His life, characterized by a deep connection to the land and a profound reliance on the kindness of his community, was inherently valuable, and his violent, terrifying final moments in the shadows of the Hamakua coast demand a resolution that the universe has thus far completely failed to provide. Until the day the silence is finally broken, until the unknown perpetrator is dragged from the shadows and forced to answer for the stolen decades and the unimaginable pain inflicted upon the victim's family, the story of Case F-96184 will remain an open, bleeding wound on the historical record of Hawaii. The towering cliffs of the Valley of the Kings will continue to stand as silent, imposing witnesses to the tragedy. The dark volcanic sands will continue to absorb the intense tropical heat, and the majestic, thunderous waves of the Pacific will continue to crash against the shoreline, offering absolutely no comfort, no answers, and no closure. It is entirely up to the living to carry the heavy, sacred burden of his memory, to relentlessly echo his name across the sprawling, interconnected highways of the island, and to maintain the fierce, uncompromising belief that the truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath the earth or how heavily obscured by the passage of time, possesses an undeniable, intrinsic power that will eventually, inevitably break through the darkness and finally bring the shadow in the sand into the harsh, blinding light of justice. His memory must be protected from the void, shining brightly against the overwhelming darkness that sought to permanently obscure his gentle soul from the world.